Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Dead Woman of Deptford, a Victorian London murder mystery, by Anne Granger. Narrated by Gareth Armstrong and Julia Barrie.
The very existence of London depends on the navigation of the Thames, insomuch that if this river were rendered unnavigable, London would soon become a heap of ruins, like Nineveh and Babylon. The picture of London for 1818. Chapter 1. Inspector Ben Ross. His name was Harry Parker. He was a small, scrawny figure and scruffily dressed. In the yellow light cast by the police lantern, he peered up at us with the trapped look of a strayed dog, cornered and at bay. He gripped a cloth cap in his hands, pressing it against his chest, and his little eyes flickered from one to the other of us, always returning to my face. I could not have said what kind of an impression he would make as a witness, on a judge or jury. I only knew that he made a very poor impression on me. A little under an hour earlier, I'd thought myself finished for the day. I'd even uttered the words, "Well, Morris, I think we might at last go home." The sergeant and I had been out of London, clearing up a matter in Cambridge, where assistance had been requested. Police duties apart, it had been a pleasant break. Cambridge had seemed quiet after London, and we'd appreciated the cleaner air, the atmosphere of the university town, its fine Gothic buildings, and the open meadows on which the cattle grazed. It had truly appeared a different world. Returning home, we'd been able to see from the train the grey pall of smoke that hung above our great capital. It could have been worse. This month, November, normally saw more fog rolling up the Thames estuary. Mixed with the coal smoke, it often formed a dense, bad-smelling, yellowish mass that invaded every nook and cranny, right down to pavement level, and cloaked the buildings with a dirty veil. You could not brush by without your clothes being marked with black smears. But though cold and damp, we had so far been spared, a London peculiar. Morris and I left the train to be swallowed up at once in the scurrying crowds, and made our way through packed thoroughfares. Our ears were assaulted by the rattle of wheels and clip-clop of hooves, the cries of street vendors and jangling of barrel organs. All life was here, with respectable citizens, mixed beggars, who made their trade obvious, and pickpockets, who did not. Cambridge's lively but scholarly atmosphere might have been another country. When we passed through the doors of Scotland Yard, it seemed we'd reached sanctuary. I registered our return, promised our report first thing in the morning, and all that was left now was the pleasant expectation of supper with our families. That was when fate conjured up a herald of doom, in the person of a red-faced, breathless young constable. The clatter of boots on the stairs heralded his appearance in the doorway, clutching a letter. He was perspiring profusely. "Who are you?" snapped Morris, not recognising the newcomer, but identifying an obstacle between himself and his own fireside. "Evans, sir, from Deptford," squeaked the newcomer. He peered doubtfully from one to the other of us. "They told me downstairs to ask for Inspector Ross." "Did they indeed? I'm Ross." I stepped forward and took the letter he held out. "Well, lad, what's brought you so urgently?" "We have a murder, sir," declared the youngster excitedly. "They only just found the body. It's in Skinner's Yard. Oh, and, sir, Inspector Phipps sends his compliments and his apologies," he added belatedly. "Good of him," muttered Morris behind me. We both now knew that there was no telling when we would get home that night. The building had emptied of most officers, and those remaining were busy, or busy enough to send Constable Evans to me. I read the letter slowly. Murdered woman, eh? "The body's still lying where it was found," urged Evans. "I'm to take you there, sir." The lad was actually hopping from foot to foot. It was necessary to do something before this eager young Mercury was so overcome by excitement I had to pour water over him. There was nothing for it. I sent him out to find a four-wheeler cab that could transport all three of us to the scene. "Sorry, Morris," I said to him, as we made our way out of the building. Morris mumbled some reply, but I did not catch it. I didn't need to. I reread Phipps's letter on our way south of the river. I was seated next to young Evans, as he was of slighter build than Morris, whose generous bulk nearly filled the opposite seat. To read, I had to twist myself into an awkward position and hold up the paper to the eerie glow of the gaslight from the street. It made the document look like some medieval parchment. The jolting of the cab sent the words leaping up and down, but I could just manage to make them out. The murder had some unusual features, wrote Phipps, but he did not divulge what those might be. He was, however, strongly of the opinion the investigation would be better handled by the Yard. At Deptford they'd not the resources. A recent increase in drunken brawls and fights among seamen, many of them off foreign ships and speaking no English, kept them fully occupied. I did not know Inspector Phipps, though I'd heard of him, and his reputation was of a capable officer, but I found it difficult to believe that such anarchy raged in Deptford that a murder investigation could not be given priority, at least initially. If there proved to be complications, it might later come the way of the Yard. That we were called in immediately brought to mind the expression, hot potato. I peered from the window. Deptford had long had a claim to being the most insalubrious area of London, and that against some stiff competition. Yet the scenes we passed revealed a lively place. Along the river lay ships at anchor on one hand, their tall masts a forest against the night sky. Occasionally the darkness of the winter sky was illuminated by a shower of red and gold sparks, as if someone had set up a spectacular firework. The impromptu display marked where men worked on the hull of an ironclad vessel in one of the shipyards. We rumbled by the dark bulk of the great warehouses of the wholesale traders. Cargo ships came into the port of London from all over the world. With other smells that found their way into the cab, my nose caught the scent of spices and tobacco. Many small businesses also depended on the docks, chandlers, smithies, and wheelwrights. We clattered along the high street, which boasted the usual grocers, fruiterers, and wine merchants, many of them busy even at this late hour. From the brief glimpses afforded me, many shop premises appeared small and cramped within, with low ceilings and exposed wooden rafters. Already every drinking den we passed was full. We caught snatches of raucous singing and the scrape of a fiddle. Above us, the upper stories of the buildings blotted out the sky, human anthills in which families were crammed, often in a single room. I had not seen any evidence of the rioting mobs, yelling abuse in a variety of languages suggested by Phipps's request for assistance from the Yard. I could say nothing aloud before the Deptford constable, but I had deep misgivings about this whole business. I passed Phipps's letter to Morris, who scanned it as best he could, before we turned off into less well-lit streets. Aloud, as poor consolation, I said to him, "Perhaps it'll turn out something that Deptford can cope with perfectly well, after all." "Then why don't they?" muttered Morris. Perhaps he did not intend me to hear him. Perhaps he was hungry and tired, and didn't care. But Evans heard him, and I felt him flinch. When shortly afterwards the cab rocked to a halt, his voice came nervously in the gloom. "It's here, sir." We scrambled down. I paid the cabby, and got him to scrawl a receipt on a scrap of paper I hunted out of my pocket. I trusted I would be reimbursed. The Yard had already funded our return train fares to Cambridge that day, so an additional claim might well be declared above the set allowance. The cab rattled away, leaving us in an area somewhere between the river and the commercial heart of the place. Eyes watched us from all the buildings around, but the actual watchers had retreated out of sight. We followed young Evans, who led us through a gap and into a dark, evil-smelling place, inadequately lit by the light from windows overlooking the spot and the bobbing rays from police bull's-eye lanterns. The bearer of one such lantern raised it on high so that the beam targeted my face, and revealed the carrier to be a sturdy figure in heavy caped uniform coat and helmet. "Barrett, sir," said the uniformed man, as I shielded my eyes from the sudden glare. "I've got him here. The fellow found the body." My eyes were adjusting to the poor visibility. The area in which we found ourselves was not so much a proper yard as a gap between tall brick buildings, extending 20 feet to the rear and measuring some 15 to 20 feet in width. Rubble scattered about suggested a building that had been demolished, perhaps an old warehouse, and no one had seen any purpose in replacing it. Taken together with the surviving houses flanking the gap, the effect was of a row of aged teeth, slowly crumbling and falling out. The street behind us was lit by gas lamps, but they cast little light into this desolate nook. Only the oil-fuelled beams of the lanterns barely reached to the far end, where dilapidated wooden lean-to buildings suggested privies. Once everyone living here probably used these, and they were still used by some, if the stench was anything to go by. Bazalgette's sewer system for London had not yet tunnelled its way here. Those privies must drain into some rarely emptied cesspit, or even worse, still channelled their refuse into the river. Elsewhere, the new sewers had done much to banish the spectre of cholera, but if it were to return, this yard was an ideal breeding ground for its horrors. Litter and rubbish of all kinds was heaped about, festering and odorous. Rats scuttled here and there boldly, lured out by easy pickings, and tonight by the scent of blood. Like his colleague Evans, Constable Barrett was young but keen. He hauled his prize out of the shadows and into the light with a flourish, rather like a conjurer producing a rabbit out of a hat. "Here he is, sir," he declared triumphantly. I clapped my chilled hands together, partly to dispel the numbness, but also to underline I was in charge here, and scowled my displeasure at the miserable specimen of dockside riffraff before me. He, in response to my glare and the echo of my hands round the brick walls, cowered back. He looked even more terrified. Good. It might be unfair at this point to blame him for my delayed return home and hot dinner, but I was only human, and in the absence of Inspector Phipps, had to focus my resentment on some target. "What's your name?" I demanded of the unprepossessing specimen of humanity pushed under my nose. I had seen a rat circus once, performing in a large cage, prodded and bribed by a human ringmaster. It was as if one of those performers had escaped and stood before me, dressed in jacket and trousers, and standing on its hind paws. My nose, in fact, conveyed the first information about him. The witness had spent his recent hours in a pub. He reeked of beer, sweat, sawdust, and tobacco smoke. "Parker," our witness mumbled. "Harry Parker." In a spurt of courage, fuelled by resentment, he pointed at Barrett. "I already told that Rosa, didn't I?" "What's your occupation, Mr. Parker?" "I work in the docks," he muttered. "I wait at the gates early in the morning when they hire men for the day. If I'm hired, I do anything I'm set to, loading or unloading, fetching and carrying. And a bit of thieving, if you can manage it," I thought to myself. The casual labourers hired at the dock gates in the morning were searched on leaving the docks at the end of the day, but with a crowd of weary, ill-tempered fellows pushing by, and only a couple of men at the gates to check each one, it was not possible to stop pilfering. "How did you come to find her?" I asked him next. "I fell over her." His voice rose indignantly to a squawk. "I told her Rosa that and all. It's not my fault, is it? I never went looking for it, did I? I come in here—" he waved a hand to indicate the yard. "I came in here on account of a call of nature." He spoke the euphemism with a ludicrous dignity, and pointed towards the wooden sheds at the back of the yard. I doubted he'd been making for them. No one in his right mind would willingly enter one of them after nightfall and risk tumbling headfirst into a stinking pit. "I never saw her in the dark," Parker went on. "There's no light here except what comes in from the street, or shines down from up there, if someone pulls back a curtain." He jabbed a finger upward. "It gave me an horrible shock. I ran out back into the street, and there was a—" He checked himself, perhaps realising from Barrett's scowl that he would not like being described as a Rosa for a third time. Parker amended his closing words. "I told this here constable. Ask him." "That's correct, sir," said Barrett. "I was on my regular beat. The witness came rushing out into the street and nearly knocked me over. He was gibbering with fright and making no sense at all. 'In there,' he kept saying, so I pushed him back in front of me into this yard, making sure to keep my hand on his collar. Sure enough, there we found the poor woman." I wondered if the constable had not happened to be on the spot, whether Parker would have gone in search of him. More likely, he'd have run home and left the grim discovery to someone else. Parker snuffled into his cap. "I'm a decent working man," he concluded in tones of self-pity, as if even he believed the fiction. I glanced upwards. There was no knowing how much light had fallen into the yard from above earlier. Now that word had got round, and that word was murder, every window overlooking the yard was open and had one or more figures leaning out, eager to watch the show below. A theatre in the round, I thought, and we are the players. A babble of excited voices floated down. "Can you see the body?" demanded a shrill female voice. "Nah, they got it covered over. Over there by the wall, see? There's something there." "I can't see nothing." grumbled the first voice. "We shall have to send officers into those buildings asking if anyone saw or heard anything," I said to Sergeant Morris. "They're showing enough interest now. I wish Phipps had sent men in there already." Barrett, anxious to defend his own colleagues and his senior officer, said, "There's no one to send, sir. There is a Russian cargo ship docked, and it's been very lively around here this evening." "So I understand from Inspector Phipps's message," I said, "though things seem quiet enough at the moment, apart from this unfortunate dead woman, of course." "We've had every man we can spare out on the street, sir," said Barrett, "to make sure things don't get out of hand. You should have been here yesterday, sir. It was like the blooming Battle of Waterloo." "I'll drum up a number of constables to go round knocking on doors first thing tomorrow, sir," said Morris. "It's too late to get hold of anyone extra now. The delay won't make any difference, because I reckon no one will have heard a thing. It's too dark here to have seen much either. If anyone did, they won't admit to it. But let's face it, who would take any notice of a few shouts or a scuffle? There's generally some kind of a hullabaloo somewhere around here, as that lad Evans knows." Well, after all, that was true enough, even though I still suspected Phipps had exaggerated the latest outbreak of fisticuffs. We were attracting a lot of interest now, but my guess was that Morris was right. No one would admit to having seen anything earlier, or to having heard a call for help, or a woman's scream. As for suspects, we would have more than we could wish. Around us were countless drinking dens and bawdy houses, and squalid rooming establishments, providing cheap shelter for seamen of all nations. So yes, there was often violence, and tonight there was murder. The body lay a short distance off, decently covered with a tarpaulin. I signalled to Evans to pull back the covering so that I could view it as well as was possible by the lantern light. He obeyed and scuttled back, gulping. I hoped he was not going to be sick. Even in the gloom, and with the horror of her injuries, it was clear to me this was not one of London's countless street women. Perhaps it was that which had alarmed Phipps. She was sturdily built and respectably dressed, though I could see no hat or bonnet, nor any shawl or coat. She appeared simply to have walked out of some nearby house into the cold night air just for a moment on some trivial errand. Even at this late hour, as I'd remarked earlier, many of the little shops were open to catch the very last of the day's trade. Together with all the rogues and ruffians lurking in the neighbourhood of any port, there were still citizens of the more decent sort to be seen, home-going workmen, or housewives scurrying to buy something needed to make the evening meal, or a child sent out with twopence to buy a pinch of tea. If you're poor, you don't buy tea by the packet. You buy it as needed to make a brew, a tiny amount in a twist of paper. The dead woman, had she been on such an errand? Was her family even now waiting for her at home? I stooped and fingered the hem of her skirt. In the inadequate light, it appeared dark in colour. It was of quality cloth, the hem trimmed with braid, but otherwise unadorned. She had not been a very poor woman, and my first idea that she might have been paying a last-minute visit to a grocer seemed less likely. She was the sort to keep a larder well stocked, a respectable woman at first view, and that could be enough to worry Phipps. It was hard to judge her age, as one side of her head had been viciously battered. I thought her probably in her 50s. She wore no earrings and no wedding ring. Her killer may have made off with those. Or the wretched Parker might even have robbed the body before he raised the alarm. I wouldn't have put it past him. I drew Barrett aside. Parker, though clearly relieved to be free of the constable's surveillance, watched with apprehension. "Has that fellow blood on him?" I asked Barrett. "Some," replied the constable in a low voice. "On his right sleeve, sir, and on his hands. He says he stooped down and shook her shoulder when he first stumbled over her. He thought she might be drunk, but then he struck a match, saw her injuries and the blood, and knew she must be dead." "Well, we mustn't lose him," I warned. "Take him back to the station and make him turn out his pockets, then get a statement and his details. Make sure he gives an address that's genuine. Either go yourself, or if need be, send a colleague with him to his house. If any of his clothing is blood-stained, get him to change into something else and bring the stained clothes away for further examination. I'm not prepared to take anything said by Mr. Harry Parker as gospel." A rumble of wheels came from the street. A closed van had arrived to take the victim to the morgue. The chattering voices about our heads fell silent in a moment of respect. "I'll leave you in charge here, Morris," I said to him. "Secure the area so that we can come back and search by daylight. Report to me in the morning." "Yes, Inspector Ross," said Morris resignedly. I was sorry to abandon him there, but there was nothing more I could do for the moment. I set off home, to my wife. Chapter 2. My little house is near the great rail terminus of Waterloo, so I was on the necessary south bank of the Thames, but still a tidy distance away and unlikely to find any cab plying for trade here. I directed my steps towards the Thames, hoping to find a ferry able to take me upriver to a spot near Waterloo Bridge. To find the river was straightforward enough. I had only to follow my nose. The docks and wharves were just a few streets away. They began building ships for the Royal Navy at Deptford in good old, or bad old, depending on your point of view, King Henry VIII's time. With such patronage, what area could fail to thrive? And so Deptford did, for a time. Open countryside had lain between it and London's plague-ridden hovels, so fashionable people raised fine houses here. Good Queen Bess had visited in person to greet Francis Drake on his return from his adventures. In Deptford, she had created him a knight right there on board his own ship at anchor. It was over at Deptford Puddle, they claimed locally, that Sir Walter Raleigh had spread his cloak to save his monarch from soiling her shoes. Even such an exotic visitor as the Russian Tsar Peter had come here to watch the shipwrights at their work, amid the hammering and sawing and overpowering fug of boiling tar. London's sprawl had since eaten up the fields and small holdings, sucking everything into its capacious brick maw. Now almost permanently enveloped in the pall of London smoke, Deptford had lost favour with the well-to-do. Worse, its great dockyard had recently also fallen from favour with the Royal Navy. Modern ships are ironclad. The work will go to private yards. Another piece of government trade had disappeared, now that the notorious convict transports to Australia have finally ceased. Pity about that, lament the ship owners and sea captains of Deptford. It was a regular cargo. I turned into a narrow and deserted lane. There were gas lamps positioned at either end, but their glow only cast an eerie sheen on the nearer walls and did not reach the middle where a pit of black uncertainty awaited me. I wondered if I had been wise to leave behind bustle and crowds, and whether I was indeed really alone. The loudest sound was that of my own footsteps, yet there was something more. My ear caught the creak of unoiled wheels behind me, and a rumble and rattle as they bounced unevenly over the cobbles. I stopped and spun round. I was not surprised to see a handcart had turned into the lane and was being propelled laboriously towards me. It was piled high with some load, partly covered with a tarpaulin. An extraordinary creature was in charge of it. I say creature, for at first sight it hardly appeared human. With a corner gas lamp behind it, I could at first only distinguish a broad, shapeless form, entirely black, and with flapping wings to either side, like a gigantic bat. It crouched forward with the effort of pushing the load. Then the cart trundled into the dim circle of light cast by an oil lamp fixed above a storehouse door. I saw better who propelled it. A rag picker. It was a common enough trade, and nothing to be surprised at. Under the tarpaulin I could glimpse a jumbled heap of old clothing and other junk. A wave of relief swept over me. I chided myself for giving way moments earlier to my imagination. What on earth could I have expected? The moon then chose to come to my aid and cast its pale light upon my companion. The ragman appeared to be wearing a selection of the tattered garments he'd gathered over the years. Baggy trousers, some sort of coat of Prince of Wales check, and a grubby neckerchief. Over all this he wore a big black opera cloak that must once have been worn by some theatre-goer in a more wealthy area of the city. I could see it had what looked like a velvet collar. It was this cloak that had given the wing-like effect. His hair, long, grey and uncombed, fell to his shoulders from beneath a battered high hat, such as might also have been worn by a dandy some 40 or so years earlier. His face was gaunt and marked with deep creases. He looked incredibly old, and I wondered he had the strength to push the cart over the cobbles. Seeing my eyes on him, his withered lips parted in a grotesque grimace, revealing a row of rotten teeth that reminded me of the buildings I'd just left behind me. There were even a few gaps, such as the one leading into the yard where the murdered woman had been discovered. "Good evening, sir," he croaked, and tilted his head sideways at the same time. The wrinkled skin on his cheeks folded into deeper crevices. His gaze seemed to be looking at me, around me, and even through me all at once. It was like being surveyed by some sort of wild animal. He was certainly elderly, but not perhaps quite as old as I'd first judged him. "Good evening," I replied. He made to push his load on down the street, but I put out a hand to stop him, and he did as I wished, setting down the wooden feet at one end of the barrow and releasing his grip on the handles. He did not, however, straighten up, but remained in the semi-crouched stance. Perhaps he had some deformity of the spine, or perhaps he had spent so many years pushing this barrow that he'd just forgotten how to stand up straight. His elusive gaze still played over me. I felt uncomfortable under it. "You work this area regularly?" I asked him. To encourage a reply, I took a shilling from my pocket and held it out. A hand, more a talon than human, shot out and grabbed the coin. Cold, scaly fingertips brushed mine, and I recoiled from the touch. "Police officer," he said hoarsely. "Plain clothes sort, ain't ya?" I wasn't surprised he identified me so easily. The poor, whether gainfully employed or not, easily recognised the law. "That's right," I said. "I collect rags everywhere," he told me. "Not just round here. Where there's people, there's what they throws out. I even go over the river up west. I get good pickings there." That must be where he'd obtained the opera cloak and tall hat, but I wondered he had the strength to push the barrow so far. "Were you in this area a little earlier this evening?" He squinted at me. "I was. After I come back from Greenwich, I was at the Seamen's Hospital." I recalled the Seamen's Hospital was anchored there. It was housed not in a building but a ship, and one with a fine history as a ship of the line. No longer needed by the Navy, she'd been purchased by a philanthropic society and set up as a hospital for merchant seamen, the river providing a cordon sanitaire between their diseases and the shore. "What took you there?" I asked. It wasn't a place many volunteered to visit. I caught a cunning glance from the corner of his bleary eyes. His upper body tilted towards me as if he would make some confidence. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. "They usually have scraps of stuff for me. The fever patients and such. The hospital burns the rags what they're wearing when they come in. What they don't burn, the dead don't need no more, and no one else claims, they let me have." Despite myself, I took a step back. He noticed it and grinned hideously at me. I could not but look again with horror at the stack of rags on his barrow, and tried not to imagine what diseases might infest them along with the fleas and lice. I hoped he was right, and the hospital did burn the discarded clothing of the fever victims. Foreign sailors had been known to arrive carrying smallpox. "You have not—" My voice sounded to my own ears strained. "You've not noticed a well-dressed woman, middle-aged, sturdily built in the area earlier? Perhaps 3 hours ago. Perhaps alone, or perhaps with a man?" "Drab," he croaked. I shook my head. "No, a respectable woman in appearance." He shook his head. "Nah, not that I noticed. I only notice them if I think they might have something for me." Then he said suddenly, "There was a murder done earlier, wasn't there? Just back there." And he pointed down the way I'd come. "Yes, how did you learn of it?" I asked sharply. He snorted and rubbed his grimy claw across his face. "Murder? Everyone hears about it, and they don't talk about nothing else for days. I stopped to wet my whistle at the Clipper public house, and I heard it there." "What's your name?" I asked him. "Raggy Jeb, they call me," he replied. "You can ask anyone round here for me. They all know me." "You have a surname?" "Fisher," he said. "They give me that name at the workhouse, on account I was fished out of the river when I was a baby. Someone threw me in, like I was a bag of rubbish. My swaddling clothes got caught up on a spar and kept me afloat long enough for a lighterman to fish me out. Workhouse was all my family." A childhood in such a grim institution was no childhood at all, but he had survived it. "Well, Jeb Fisher, if you hear anything regarding this murder you might think would interest me, if you hear anyone say he thought he might have seen the woman earlier, you come and tell me. Inspector Ross at Scotland Yard." "Worth my while?" he bargained. "Yes, if what you tell us proves true. Don't come with fancy inventions." He nodded, and without another word seized the handles of his barrow to push it and its load of festering rags onward. Then, hardened by my experiences though I was, I received such a shock that I let out a cry of alarm. The tarpaulin covering the rags moved. The first thought to flash through my mind was that a rat had hitched a ride. But it was far worse. A small, very small human hand emerged from the tarpaulin. Tiny fingers gripped the edge to pull it back into place. I reached out and snatched it back. There before me, crouched amid the rags, was a child.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?